What happens if you don't ground your weld? Because welding is such a risky task, it must be done carefully and with an eye on safety. There are various considerations to make during welding to keep everyone safe. Making sure your unit is grounded is one of the most crucial safety precautions you must take as a welder. Is a ground required for welding? In other words, you can weld without a ground, but doing so compromises your safety. You run the risk of endangering not just your safety but also the safety of others, breaking your welding equipment, and ruining the thing you're working on. You might be confused about whether to ground your welding equipment during setup, or if you can weld without it in any situation. Beyond ensuring the safety of welders, grounding is crucial. To prevent damaging beginner mistakes, this guide will explain the significance of grounding during welding. Grounding a welder. There are several schools of thought about whether or not a welder has to be grounded. Keep in mind that safety should be your top priority. The operator of the building and anybody around are all at risk if a welder is used without being grounded. Failure to ground your welding table exposes you to electrical shocks and may potentially cause damage to the workpiece, your welding machine, and other surrounding machinery. Should every welder be grounded? You might be wondering whether all welders need to be grounded after learning the consequences of opting not to ground a welder. Fortunately, some welders already have double insulation that serves as the grounding required for the equipment to be used properly. There is no need to ground a welder if it has double insulation. Why is a welding table necessarily grounded? You're undoubtedly still curious about the danger posed by not grounding the welder. I am aware that many people are trying to find ways to cut corners to save time. I've already explained how choosing not to ground yourself, your machine, and the machinery or object being welded on puts you at risk. But let's get more specific. Because arc welding uses an open circuit of electricity to weld. The greatest danger of not grounding your work while welding is that stray energy from the welder might wind up being transmitted into the welder if the welder's body is the path of least electrical resistance. A welder is unlikely to be electrocuted or killed by electricity when zapped by straight energy from welding equipment, since the voltages used in welding are quite modest. However, if the welding flame is spilled, the shock can be unpleasant and painful, and can harm the welding machine, the project that is being done, or the surrounding equipment. Since water is a natural conductor, doing this is especially risky while operating in damp settings. When you pair this with an unground welder, your risk of receiving a shock rises. You also increase your fire risk when you choose to weld using a non-grounded welder. The electricity will eventually depart the cables if there is no ground wire for it to go to, which might potentially start a fire. A ground clamp is required when welding with an arc, because the TIG torch's attempt to create a circuit with the table causes the arc from the electrode. The grounding lead in this instance is referred to as the work lead. Without it, the torch won't arc, which prevents the weld from happening. Conclusion. The key lesson to be learned from this video should be that while it is technically possible to weld without a ground, it is not advised for reasons of health and safety. Without a ground, welding increases the possibility that something exceedingly harmful and potentially fatal may happen. It should be obvious that grounding the welder is an important step that shouldn't be overlooked when comparing the dangers of welding with and without a ground. Spend the extra money to hire someone if you don't feel electrically skilled enough to complete this. Even if the jolts are too little to be uncomfortable or damaging while you are welding, stop and inspect your tools, including the ground. Keep in mind that you don't want to serve as the energy's launching pad.